Anatomy of a Smear: How George Soros and the World Government Lobby Tried to Sabotage John Bolton's Nomination to the UN. I'm reading from usasurvival.org, a PDF document, and we'll provide a link in the video description. Liberals like to talk about the culture of corruption, but liberal groups which opposed the nomination of John Bolton as U.S. ambassador to the UN now have a scandal of their own. The vicious attacks on Bolton's nomination were compared to the misrepresentation of Robert Bork's views when he was nominated by President Reagan to the U.S. Supreme Court. Bolton defenders said that he had been subjected to a campaign of character assassination. What has not been known until now is that an organization associated with billionaire leftist George Soros had hired a controversial Democratic Party political consultant to help organize its campaign against Bolton. This consultant, Robert B. Creamer, was under indictment at the time and subsequently pleaded guilty to a federal bank fraud and tax charge. Morton Halperin, above, of the George Soros, pictured above on this document that you'll see when you click on the link, of the George Soros-funded Open Society Policy Center, organized the opposition to John Bolton as U.S. ambassador to the UN. His group hired a controversial political operative who has pleaded guilty to federal bank fraud and tax charges to pressure liberal Republican Senator Lincoln Chafee to vote against Bolton. The report is published and distributed by America's Survival Incorporated, Cliff Kincaid. Now, I know of Cliff Kincaid, and I believe he's very credible. What's more, Creamer is married to liberal Democratic Representative Jan Schakowsky, who serves in the House Democratic leadership as Chief Deputy Whip. A supporter of Howard Dean's presidential campaign, one of her websites features photos of her with comedian and political activist Al Franken. Schakowsky had steadfastly maintained her husband's innocence. After his guilty plea, she declared that, quote, "In my heart, I know that these mistakes do not define or diminish this good man or the good work that he has done over the last 40 years or that he will do in the future." In fact, as noted by CBS 2 Chicago, in a report on this matter, Creamer paid himself a six-figure salary while leaving several banks holding the bag because of his check-kiting schemes. In a January 28, 2006 column, Robert Novak reported that House Republicans, wounded by lobbyist scandals, have called on the House Ethics Committee to investigate more than 10 Democratic members headed by Jan Schakowsky of Illinois, and Nadia Velasquez of New York. Schakowsky's husband, former advocate Robert Creamer, has been indicted in a check-kiting scheme. The Republicans contend that because she signed tax returns with him, she should be investigated by the Ethics Committee. In fact, Creamer has already pleaded guilty by this point. While Creamer's involvement in the anti-Bolton campaign has only recently come to light, the American people were also not told that the various Soros-funded organizations were being actively assisted by an organization openly supporting world government and global taxes. That group, Citizens for Global Solutions, is the new name for the World Federalist Association. The Lobbying Campaign. A lobbying registration document on file with Congress says that Robert Creamer and Linda Saucedo of the Strategic Consulting Group were hired to, quote, fight the nomination of John Bolton for U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. The Strategic Consulting Group describes itself as, quote, one of the country's leading democratic political consulting firms. The clients were listed as the Open Society Institute, which is exempt from the United States income tax under Section 501c3 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code, and the Open Society's Policy Center, which is organized under Section 105c4 of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code. Both were established by George Soros, who spends between $400 million and $500 million a year through his organizations. The Open Society Policy Center, which describes itself as a nonpartisan organization that engages in policy advocacy on U.S. and international issues, included foreign operations, criminal justice reform, human rights, women's rights, and civil liberties, is closely associated with the Open Society Institute. For example, Gara LaMarche, the secretary of the board of directors of the Open Society Policy Institute, is the director of U.S. programs for Open Society Institute. Aryah Neier, chairman of the OSPC board, is president of OSI. Morton Halperin, a former Department of Defense and National Security Council official, is a former associate of CIA defector and Castro collaborator Philip Agee. He serves as senior vice president for the Center for American Progress, another Soros-funded group. In a telephone interview, Creamer associate Linda Saucedo called the filing of the lobbying registration statement a mistake. "We did have some phone calls," she said. "It's not considered direct lobbying." She said it was hardly anything in terms of money. A couple $1,000s, Saucedo also said that, contrary to what the registration said, the Open Society Policy Center organization was the only client and that the Open Society Institute was not involved. Wendy Feliz-Sassoff, SEF-SAF, Communications Liaison Officer for the Open Society Policy Center, confirmed that over 5 days in April of 2005, Strategic Consulting contacted Rhode Islanders concerning the Bolton nomination, and that the firm was paid $4,642 for these services. Their target was Senator Lincoln Chafee of Rhode Island. The fact remains that Creamer and his firm were hired in April 2005 when he was under indictment by the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Illinois, Patrick J. Fitzgerald. Creamer pleaded guilty in a plea agreement revealed on August 31st of 2005 and is awaiting sentencing in the case. Creamer admitted operating 3 check-kiting schemes resulting in bank fraud totaling at least $2.3 million. The actions involved accounts he controlled as executive director of the Illinois Public Action Fund, a so-called public interest group. The Illinois Public Action Fund, a so-called public interest group. Asked about Creamer's role and his legal problems, Saucedo said, "I can't help you on that," and suggested contacting his attorneys. At the time of the consideration of the Bolton nomination, it was thought that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which was split 10-8 between Republicans and Democrats, would approve Bolton on that basis. That is why a major effort was launched in order to persuade some Republicans on the committee to oppose the nominee. Convicted insider trader George Soros, a major funder of the liberal wing of the Democratic Party and supporter of the United Nations, played a big role in this effort. As it stood, Soros had made financial contributions of 6 to 8 Democratic members of the Foreign Relations Committee: Senator Barack Obama, Barbara Boxer, Bill Nelson, Joe Biden, Paul Sarbanes, and John Kerry. But even if the anti-Bolton forces got all 8 Democrats to vote against him, and they did, they needed 1 Republican to vote against Bolton and sink his nomination to the committee. They decided to target liberal Republican Senator Lincoln Chafee, a member of the committee, wavering on the Bolton nomination. The Washington Post noted that at the time, a negative vote by Chafee would deeply wound the nomination because it would prevent the committee, which Republicans control 10-8, from recommending Bolton to the full Senate.